I see the rainbow unicorn, but apparently I don't think you guys can tell, so it's okay. Oh, dang it. Hang on.
Matthew's playing with rainbow bright dials again.
All right, I didn't hear that. That's not funny.
Hey, Matthew, how's it going?
Doing great right now. About yourself? Looks like we got a new guest this week.
Yeah, we do. Hey, Richard, nice for you to join the party today. So, today we're going to talk about a topic that I think is applicable to just about every customer that runs IT, whether it's in the cloud or on premises. I was just talking with you, Matthew, earlier today that I've got a generator sitting out on the side of my house that I've not once actually been able to take advantage of, but I am prepared because I know in the past I've lost power, and it's going to happen again in the future. So that's when it comes to planning for disasters, you never know when they're going to happen. Azure, fortunately, provides a lot of facilities to be able to make that easier for our customers. So I know, Richard, you've had the, I don't know if I should say luxury, because, in the context of something bad happening, that's not, you don't want to talk about it in a positive light, but we can talk about it positively, how Azure kind of helped avert some disastrous situations that your customer had. So, thank you for coming on the show, and looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Absolutely, and thank you for having me. So I have a couple PowerPoints just to keep us on task and to show this story and what makes this different. I'm not going to go big on the technologies because anyone in IT has seen these technologies before. What happens when you're planning your DR strategy and the disaster hits before you've even executed your plan? And that's kind of what this story was. So we fictionalized the name to keep the customer's identity private. So we're going to call them Contoso County.
Hey, Brian, I've heard of this company before. It sounds like they have a lot of trouble and lots of times no.
Well, Blue Yonder Airlines County was a mouthful. And Blue Yonder Airlines is another Microsoft brand that I use in a lot of my stories, actually. So.
Are they cousins to AdventureWorks? I hear a lot of that lots of times.
And Tailspin Toys. Tailspin Toys.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. So I call this my Azure Rescue Story because when the big fires hit this year, and everyone knows what was going on in California, one of the counties that has an emergency preparedness dispatching application run out of their data center, their ISP completely burned down. Because it was, yeah. And so firefighters and rescue first responders could not coordinate. They were back to walkie-talkies, pen and paper. And when you're in areas that are blazing, the last thing you need to do is worry about an old school walkie-talkie, tablets, all the stuff that was equipped in the fire department, or I'm sorry, the fire trucks, the ambulances. On top of that, which we'll talk about as well, while this fire was raging and while the county's main data center was offline, the data center was okay, but their connectivity was gone, you still have residents in other parts of the county that need to pay their bills, pay their water, getting permitting, people that were trying to manage water and all these resources. So they had two critical apps they needed to get up right away. They were using VMware on premises, so they were familiar with virtualization, so that part of the Azure story was great. And so what happened was on a Friday afternoon, I got called and said, hey, there's no one else available. We have a county, Contoso County needs help to get these apps back online in Azure. And that's where Azure came in and was able to become the hero to the first responders and to Contoso County.
And it always happens on a Friday afternoon, right?
Of course, actually it did. And it was just very lucky for me because I wasn't traveling. I was home a grand total of an hour and a half from the airport when I got the call. This was in my last role as a premier field engineer, so I was just traveling all the time. So first we had to brainstorm. They had no internet connectivity, and all the attaching county buildings all ran their internet connectivity through the main data center. So obviously that was kind of a challenge. They had no Azure Site Recovery. That's what ASR is. And that's our traditional DR story. They're in the process of evaluating it. They knew what it was, but their Azure exposure, their enterprise agreement had been maybe a week old of having been signed. And there was a time crunch because we needed to get the firefighters deployed safely, be able to have an emergency broadcast system that can let them know when the fire is shifting. They used VMware on-prem, which meant all the Hyper-V skill set wasn't there, and that's where Azure is, since it natively runs Hyper-V in the cloud. That would be a very easy transition, but we had to brainstorm around that. And training. They literally had a week's worth of exposure to Azure, just knew how to log into the portal. So we needed to find some way to get these applications up into Azure quickly, with understanding our limited internet connectivity, and in a way that was simple so that the IT admins that have no previous Azure experience could be successful in this.
Okay.
Right?
So and just as a summary, Azure Site Recovery replicates virtualized machines or physical machines into Azure, and certainly to do that, it requires some sort of connectivity. So it sounds like that. You were
had they had ASR set up when the connectivity went down, they could have still done a failover, but that required that the plan was already in motion, was already successful. We'd already replicate. And that was part of the challenges. They hadn't gotten that far yet. This was just a terrible timing of Mother Nature, if you will.
Okay.
This sounds like a movie plot, and I need to go get my popcorn real quick and sit down and watch this as it unfolds.
If IT and the IT drama really gets you excited, get your popcorn.
That's right. That's right.
For those of us that want to watch a 3D movie with big explosions, this one might not be so exciting.
Well, I want to see how you solved it without ASR and internet. I'm like, did you go all MacGyver and build your own satellite dish, or did you do share?
Well, we have friends at, I'll say, Tailspin Toys Coffee that were able to help us.
Oh, so I love these companies.
Once we started working through and we realized what the limitations were, I was very fortunate that I have a big, strong background in VMware before I came to Microsoft. So I knew we could convert the VMDKs to VHDs. And their data center was still alive, so they did that. They got some USB drives, but they also had no Hyper-V. So the Microsoft Virtual Machine Converter was my go-to, but the new version requires you to connect to a Hyper-V host. So instead, I did some research on my own and found that if you use PowerShell, you can actually just convert the VMDKs to VHDs without requiring a Hyper-V host. Another option was, because we had multiple work streams going, because we wanted to make sure we had as many solutions to try because time was of the essence. We didn't have a trial and error time forgiveness, if you will. So while this one worked really, really well, they also just installed the Hyper-V tools. Hyper-V PowerShell on Windows 10 can natively convert VMDKs as well to VHDs. There's some example PowerShell commands of what we would use, and that took the longest time because it just takes a long time. Thankfully, their laptops had SSDs. They had good, fast storage, so we were able to get that done. And these applications, we were lucky, had no dependencies on Active Directory, had no dependencies on anything outside of the front-end IIS, Farm, and the back-end SQL database. So we were very, very fortunate that it was such a modular application.
Yeah, that's that's almost unheard of in a lot of places I come from, but that's great. Cool.
Well, and that's where one of the advantages of them being a government entity helped, because they do tend to run simpler applications. I mean, it was just a back-end database that keeps all the firefighter information, and then a front end that's just because all it was tracking and dispatching the sources. And then on the bill side, that was just another database of, did you pay your bill, did you not? They have a different accounting system that application feeds into, which they weren't worried about now. They can reconcile that at month end. What they needed to do is be able to still allow their county residents to pay their bills and be responsible people, right?
Yeah.
So help quantify this. Like, how many VMs are we talking? How much storage, how large are these disks that we had to convert? Just to kind of quickly provide some stats for the popcorn eaters at home.
Absolutely. So it ended up being a total of 8 VMs, 2 and 2 for the front end and back end roles for both applications. So 2 IIS and 2 SQL backends for the emergency responder dispatching tool, and then 2 front end and 2 back end. Because while we were doing this, we also were maintaining high availability in Azure, because the last thing we wanted to do was have something happen. And because their application was so modular, that worked out quite well. Okay. And then each one, so each VM, I'll average, was about 200 gig in size of data to be uploaded. So once we got them converted, they literally went to Tailspin Toys coffee shop. They were sleeping in their parking lots in their cars using the Wi-Fi to start uploading these.
Oh, wow.
And by the morning, using Azure AZ Copy, because it actually is purpose-built for that, it was successful. So some of them had to be retried, but it was able to pick up where it left off, and they got all of them up there by the next morning. So by midday Saturday in Contoso County, we had the applications up there. So now,
were the database servers clustered at all, or was everything pretty much in a very clean monolithic?
Clean monolithic using log shipping.
Okay.
So it truly was. I mean, I
Yeah.
guess for all intents and purposes, you couldn't have picked a more perfect disaster situation to kind of line things up to be able to make it easy to lift.
Exactly. And again, keep in mind, they had about a week's worth of total Azure exposure. So being able to just break this down, it's just very, they were very strong on the virtualization side. So being able to say, step one, convert to VHD. And as I show in this link, I shared that with them. We've documented the steps of everything you need to do in that VHD before you upload it. So they were able to do that on premises. The best part of the story I'll save for the end when we get there. And again, though, while the timing was unfortunate of the disaster, we couldn't have had better luck with the workloads. We couldn't have better luck with Tailspin Coffee Shop still having working internet, and that was actually of reasonable quality. So then we got the PowerShell modules installed. We went through all of the steps on the website. We went through it together, which involves some simple things like making sure the VM disks are less than a terabyte. They used the standard 80 gig, so that was great. Making sure they were VHDs. Fixed size was important because originally they had converted them over to dynamic because they do everything within provisioning in VMware. So this checklist, which I linked here as well, was very helpful in making sure, because in a panic, I didn't want to miss a step and go back to the drawing board after they spend hours uploading. They didn't want to panic. So we were very fortunate to have this excellent documentation on the Azure's portal to make sure we weren't going to miss it and get it right on the first time. So
you uploaded this directly to Azure Storage, right? These VHDs?
Directly to Azure Storage. That link even has the instructions. Couple PowerShell commands. We decided to use AZ copy because they weren't sure if their laptops would go to sleep in the middle of the night or whatever. And I've just had personally better experience with AZ copy instead of the PowerShell module of the, I think it's like put Azure VHD. I forget the syntax.
Yeah.
But there is a split there.
Yeah.
So
plus there's some retry options. There's some options certainly in AZ copy that aren't yet.
Exactly. And ironically, the scripts I'm going to show you later, I do have the syntax of that command, but we used AZ copy just because I was familiar with and had a better success rate with it. No other reason technically other than trying to make sure we did everything we could to not have to do retries and waste time as these fires were raging in California. So uploaded the VHD. This was our final execution, and this is where I think Azure became the true hero because by 5 o'clock somewhere time on Saturday afternoon, after following some PowerShell, uploading the VHDs, creating resource groups. Now, the applications did have dependencies with static coded IPs, but because they hadn't done a site-to-site VPN, we were able to reclaim the VNet they needed up in Azure, use all the same IPs, and then to the Contoso County IT team's amazement, everything powered on. Perfect. First try. It was an amazing moment, and that, to me, was how Azure became the hero because we followed a lot of steps. We spent even though we were rushed, we still had some good documentation on Microsoft's Azure portal. It's a scenario that we've done with thousands of customers, so we've worked out a lot of bugs. We know what the checklist is. So now when Contoso County comes, their first experience with Azure is, hey, we basically ran some PowerShell commands to convert a VMware VM hard stop, to a Hyper-V format, uploaded it, and they turned on. And sure, there were some knowledge gaps in terms of working out networking, which we went through. And then, of course, we added firewalls, but once we got the initial app worked up and then we were able to secure it after, we decided just to go with that approach. It was a great learning experience because in the following week, I got to engage with them again, make sure everything was still healthy. We went through to make sure that we weren't exposing them to any attack vectors. Azure has lots of security features built in the security center that we were able to go through. So now, not only were they pleased with how easy it was, they started realizing their security story was better because of things like denial of service, built-in DDoS protection, antivirus scanning, malware scanning for VMs. And as we started exploring these features, not only was Azure already the hero because the apps were working, but now they were better protected. We started turning on the Azure Application Gateway and just adding layers. And so these applications that were mission critical then became a proof of concept and then became a big advertising as well as success story for Contoso County. So
So this is like their first part of their lift and shift strategy, although unplanned.
Well, their plan was to use Azure Site Recovery. Obviously, that does require the internet, so once that went down, I will say, though, once they saw this, in all candidness, they thought, well, man, if we could have this much downtime, because keep in mind, their data center was offline. It was a hard stop. They actually said, man, if we could tell every application owner, hey, we just need a hard stop for a couple days, they thought their lift and shift strategy would be excellent. Obviously, applications aren't always that cooperative. So ASR still is going to be their complete story moving forward.
All right.
So basically, you reproduced essentially what Azure Site Recovery does for you, in terms of uploading, change sets in Azure or the actual, baseline hard disk, and you did all of that manually in very short order for eight machines.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and again, if this was their solution, if they just needed to get things up there with no worry about data integrity in terms of deltas, it would be great. Unfortunately, one of the powerful things that ASR does is, should these applications still be receiving live data, it can synchronize those changes up. And so that is a more elegant story. But since they had no connectivity, obviously nobody was paying bills, nobody was doing any dispatches to the application, so it was a hard stop. And that is where, ASR does have a better story, but, the ASR is up for that.
Yeah, and ASR works in reverse, too, if they want to fail back, to replicate those changes back. So, yeah, it definitely.
That was going to be my question then. Did they wind up having to move it back eventually?
No, they
left it.
They left it up there. And here's the thing: is they're a county, and we originally had the discussion of government Azure cloud versus commercial, and so that was part which I should have put on a brainstorming. The compliance was a big important piece, because even though they're in the however, what I like to educate a lot of government entities on is that not every application needs CGIS compliance and needs all of, because our commercial cloud is FedRAMP compliant, so that is okay. But they don't need all of the special privileges that Azure Gov has for every application, especially at the price point. So we were able to say, okay, well, the dispatching application has no sensitive information, our commercial cloud meets all their compliance requirements, so that was excellent. And then the billing application, because that's public information anyway, and we have PCI compliance and all the financial requirements they need in commercial cloud, that worked. And that was actually a really beneficial side note, is that it took their compliance officer took a time to say, okay, now we can start categorizing future applications to decide what has to go in the more expensive government cloud and what can take advantage of the more cutting-edge technology features of the commercial cloud. So it was another very happy side effect.
So I got a question for you. So the operating systems that you captured here through the conversion process, what version were they?
The applications were on 2008 R2.
Oh, wow. So you lucked out again, right? And that's like our lowest baseline for entry into our cloud, right?
So absolutely for support, but keep in mind, you can upload any VHD you want, and Azure is a fully virtualized hardware stack. I've seen DOS 5.0. I know of a customer running DOS 5.0.
No. You did not just say DOS 5.0.
True story. And it works, and it powers up. So
really?
Support from us if it crashes, but it's not because it doesn't work. It's because we don't support DOS 5.0 anymore, right? And so... and I have some older DOS and Windows 3.1 VMs that I show to customers to say, it works. Is it supported? No. But it is a fully virtualized hardware stack. It's just like dropping an install on any other physical device. So, yeah.
Yeah,
so
and from the support thing is also important, just from the agents that get deployed to the VM to allow you to do things like remote password resets or... getting health telemetry from the VM. So there's some things that are
console now that we have too that is currently in preview. But yeah, you're absolutely right. For the best experience, you want a modern app. Right. Azure is a modern development platform. It's not meant for that old legacy ghost in the closet application.
Oh, now I can bring up my Doom server and play it in the cloud. I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah. There's always the rumor of Bitcoin mining too, right? Since we have graphics cards now.
That's for another subject for another day.
Yeah, Matt's got we were talking about power usage earlier. Matt's got a whole
it's like
dedicated to that.
So I read an article of a gentleman that rented an all utilities included studio for $500 a month and just packed it full of his. I guess you can buy these machines, and he was saying, "Yeah, it's great because for $500 a month, I'm probably using $1,000 a month of power."
Oh yeah. I'm not saying I've ever done that before, but yeah.
And I thought too, how long do you think this article is going to be out there before your landlord finds out and decides he wants to take an action?
Yeah, right. So fire in the Contoso County, great job. What were some of the other things that they learned as part of this process? Because obviously you opened them up to a lot of other things. You talked about application gateway and security stories and different things. What would be
planning for what what Azure? You have a government entity. We have government cloud, and in this case, it sounds like that not all applications have to go into a government cloud just because you're a government entity. So there's some planning, a thoughtful planning that's required too, not just some technical aspects.
Absolutely. And I would say for me, what I felt was the biggest impact was that it took the fear of a completely unknown way of doing IT, i.e. the cloud transformation, took that fear away from them because they saw, hey, it's there, it's not going anywhere, and it is mature. So it took away a lot of that uncertainty. I think some of the neat features they saw as they started poking around in the portal made them excited, which is why we started adding on all these other security options. Because as long as I saw their thirst and their excitement for these things that make their on-premises life easier, we talked about using things like Azure Active Directory Application Proxy and using Azure as a DMZ, so they no longer have to worry about denial of service attacks because they're a county. So funding is always a challenge. So the more of that where they can take the advantage of our $1 billion security investment in Azure to protect their county assets, they loved that story. And it just took the fear out of them of, hey, we had to get our hands dirty. Sure, we might have liked to have learned in a little more less stressful circumstances, but they had success. And that, of course, is always going to breed confidence. So, and also the creative thinking, understanding that just because there's not a guide out there, and this is what I also really enjoyed, doesn't mean you can't do it. If you use Bing and you search for how do I get VMs into Azure without the internet, you're not going to find a guide. But by thinking outside the box, taking some growth mindset to it, right? We broke it down into component problems. And yes, we had a solution for each problem once we broke it up into kind of a assembly line style of how are we going to get these machines up in Azure.
So did they have any other prior cloud experience, or was it just purely just from a virtualization standpoint?
They run VROPS on premises, which is VMware's on-premises cloud portfolio. It kind of competes with Windows Azure PAC, which is a legacy on-premises cloud solution that we used to provide.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I've seen the WAP stack way back when, 1.0. Well, cool.
All right. Well, anything else that you think would be worthwhile to kind of outline for suggestions or pointers or tips to point to?
I think this kind of covers it. I'm hoping there are tons of resources out there. Microsoft Virtual Academy has hands-on labs for both converting from VMware to Hyper-V, as well as going from ASR labs that are superb. So if you don't want to sign up for a subscription, you can still do these hands-on labs. Talk to your Microsoft account team as well. They have tons of training resources. We want you to be successful. We want to help you not be scared of something as a dramatic change as shifting from on-premises to the cloud. And don't be afraid to think outside the box. That's what most of us love about IT, is love being mad scientists and getting our hands dirty. Azure gives you that. Don't be afraid to embrace it. With a little creativity, I think there's few IT problems you can't solve in this cloud era that we're in.
Yeah, you think back, days gone by, and how much time you typically had to wait. Even, I've had customers who talk about, virtualized environments that they have to wait, a week or two time just to get a virtual machine. You can literally do that in minutes in Azure. So, a big paradigm shift. And, one final note that I want to highlight too on the Azure Site Recovery, it has the word site recovery in it, but, you can also use it to move things from, a customer's environment into Azure. And just sever the replication.
Absolutely, and that is our preferred method for migration. Right. You protect the load in Azure So you can do a test failover. Make sure your application works. And if it doesn't, it was a test failover. You haven't impacted production at all. If it does work, well, then you plan your production failover. Once it's failed over, like as you said, just remove the protection, and there it is, up in Azure. Also now, in preview and coming soon, is the ability to do a cloud resiliency strategy. Should the big one hit the West Coast and you're concerned about your resources in the West Coast Azure region, you can use ASR shortly. It'll be in GA, but right now it's in preview, to protect those workloads in a different Azure region as well. And if you have AWS and you want to protect them in Azure, we can help you do that as well. So you can bring your AWS workloads. And so when Alexa goes offline like it did last week, you know that your workloads can still fail over to Azure. And
nice. Alexa, run ASR.
Very cool. Well, thank you.
Run ASR. How about that?
Yeah, there you go.
Well, thank you very much, Richard, for coming on, and hopefully we'll have you on talking about your other escapades and trying to fix all the world's problems.
Absolutely, I appreciate it. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks.
Yep.